This episode of the RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by the BC Centre for Agritech Innovation at Simon Fraser University. Are you ready to grow your farm business with cutting-edge technologies and innovative solutions? Our centre will drive you towards an advanced future. Get the investment, expertise, and support you need to test and develop your products or ideas through our Agritech Development Program. Google SFU Agritech Innovation to learn more.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hello, it is time for Tuesdays with Lyndsey here on RealAg Radio. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and guess what? It is World Soil Day. And I am super proud of myself for realizing it was World Soil Day before this morning when I had to put this show together. So yes, I realized it last week. I put out some calls and I said, hey, I want to talk soil on Tuesdays with Lyndsey. So that is exactly what we're going to do. So on today's show, you're going to hear from Doctors Laura van Eerd and Barbara Cade-Menun. Now, Laura is from the University of Guelph Ridgetown, and Barbara is from Swift Current Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, both working in soil, both working on very different aspects of managing our soils. And so super excited to have those conversations on today's show. I've pulled most of the profitable practices video that went up this week. It's all on incorporating cover crops into potato production, which is really cool, out on PEI. So Bernard Tobin headed out there in September. So we've got that chat with Andrew Lawless coming up as well. And then, of course, last night was the Agronomists. It was a great episode. I hope you caught it. And if you didn't, you can catch the replay on our YouTube channel or, of course, at realagriculture.com/agronomists. You can see all the past episodes there. But last night's discussion was on tile drainage. And, of course, when we're talking water and water management, there's plenty of myths, plenty of controversy, but also some really great facts. And so we had Matt Williams and Jesse Tait on the show to talk about planning a tile drainage system, some of the hiccups, some of the things you got to consider, and also the environmental aspects of where tile drainage actually can be an incredible benefit. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. But neither is overland flooding. So let's put it all in perspective. So I pulled a clip from last night's show. Again, it's just a clip. There's a whole hour, and it does get you some CEU credits if you collect those. So head on over, realagriculture.com/agronomists, if CEU credits are something you're after. I know the soil and water credit is a tough one to get, so just putting that out there. All right. As always, if you would like to send some feedback on today's show or any of our shows, frankly, you can give us a call, 1-855-776-6147, or zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. Now, before I hop to a break and we get into our first segment, I did just want to quickly note there are a few really key stories that are on realagriculture.com that I want you to go check out. Number one is here in Canada, we did see the launch of the 988 emergency line. So most are familiar with 911, and I hope your kids are familiar with 911 in the event of an emergency. Now we have 988, and 988 is a mental health crisis line. So this is not for ongoing issues and looking to find resources for mental health. This is in an emergency, in a mental health crisis. You can dial 988 from anywhere in Canada, and it will connect you with the people that you need to speak with, either for yourself or someone else. So super important there. And we also had an announcement yesterday on the new executive director of the Indo-Pacific office has been named. So that's Deidre Kelly is going to head that office. So really important strategy for Canada in the Indo-Pacific region. And so now we have some leadership there. Anyway, there's also some news on Merit Functional Foods is looking for a buyer still. And of course, we've got all sorts of other great news and coverage of Agritechnica there as well. So just thought I'd put that out there because I won't have time to do news today. So I threw it in the open. See what I did there? Alrighty. Okay, let's take a quick break, and I'm going to be back with Dr. Laura van Eerd right after this.
It's now time to do a product spotlight with FCC Ag Expert, and we're joined right now by Sarah Boychuk. Let's talk about the role that FCC Ag Expert plays in knowledge transfer amongst the generations on the farm.
Mm-hmm. So a really good example of that is actually another kid that I've worked with over this last year, Maddie from Learning About Ag with Maddie. She is a 5th generation farmer. She's a grade 5 student, and her family has been using Ag Expert, and they have really used that as a tool to get every generation involved in the farm. So her grandpa, for example, went back and added data about their farm back to 1972. And that data is there for Maddie to use and to learn from. So because Ag Expert is so simple, it's just a great opportunity to get the whole family involved and pass on those principles of farm management from one generation to the next.
That's agexpert.ca.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Farmer's Edge. Elevate your farm's soil health and profitability with Farmer's Edge. Our advanced fertility services leverage cutting-edge technology for precise soil analysis and dynamic input applications with variable rate services. Visit farmersedge.ca/farmers today. All right, as promised, it is World Soil Day, and without further ado, let's get to my discussion with Dr. Laura van Eerd and the role of cover crops in building soil organic matter. I have with me Dr. Laura van Eerd. She's Professor of Sustainable Soil Management with the University of Guelph Ridgetown. Welcome here, Laura.
Hey, thank you, Lyndsey. It's great to be talking soils.
You know, I am pretty excited about this. I won't lie. I am absolutely thrilled by all the magical things that happen below ground. And you happen to be one of those people that actually does active research into the things that we do and how we raise crops and the impact it has. So let's start with just quickly, if you could, what is some of the work that you have on the go right now?
We're doing lots of great stuff. I think it's great stuff. So I have a long-term cover crop experiment where we've been planting cover crops as frequently as we can in our rotation. And so that's now 15 years old. So that's officially long-term. And then we have some shorter-term projects that we're looking at the impacts of cover crop on the following corn crop. And in terms of actually measuring soil, we have this awesome project where we get to pay for some soil health testing in the province. So lots of
that is
great
cool
stuff.
So now, for those who may not be aware, when you say 15 years, so a long-term project, working cover crops in as much as possible. You work, of course, you're in the deep south of Ontario. You work with vegetable crops, correct?
Yes.
So how many times, or how many times are you getting a cover crop in a rotation? What is a typical rotation in some of these long-term plots?
Well, in this long-term plot, you're absolutely right, because we're in Kent County. We and still have a processing vegetable industry in the area. We can plant about half the time we're planting a veg crop, and half the time we're planting corn, soybeans, or wheat. And if we consider that we have wheat as covering the soil, we've been pretty consistent in being able to plant a cover crop. I guess the only time we don't plant a cover crop is if we're planting winter wheat or if we're following grain corn. So we have quite maybe 12 times we were able to get a cover crop in. So very high frequency of planting a cover crop.
And so what have been some of the major observations and major findings of looking at, that kind of timeline?
Yeah, so we have pushed the needle on soil organic matter. Now, the very fortunate part of this experiment is we have 2 side-by-side trials where it's just delayed by 1 year. So 1 year's a year behind, but that gives us a lot of samples. Like we can collect from 80 experimental units or 80 plots, and with that amount of accuracy and precision, we have found some statistical differences with having long-term cover crops versus the no cover crop in terms of increasing soil organic matter. Now, it's not a lot. It's like, the best one is maybe 0.5% more organic matter, but we're seeing it in the crop. Like the crop is yielding more. Partly it's because of nitrogen, and we don't know if that nitrogen availability is due to water availability, right? We've had some pretty dry early in the season, or dry, and we know nitrogen and water move together, so we're trying to figure out that part of the soil health equation, trying to get at the mechanisms. But we have seen some really significant yield responses where if you only planted the cover crop once, you might expect to see immobilization of nitrogen, right? If you only planted rye or oats once, you would expect it to tie up the nitrogen. But with these long-term cover cropping, I think we've affected that carbon and nitrogen cycling to the advantage of the corn crop. And so I'm really looking forward to coming out your way to Kemptville, to the Eastern Crop Day, and showing our actual numbers. So by that time, we will have 4 site years of corn data of its response to long-term cover cropping. And it is pretty substantial.
So, and that's, I mean, it's a really interesting finding as well, is that, 0.5% organic matter doesn't sound like we should be, throwing a parade or anything. But the fact that, I think it's still, any improvement is better than either maintaining or loss. So still a win. But, if you can start to quantify, you and your team can quantify that just that 0.5% can benefit, several, year over year, then it really does sort of put some parameters in just how impactful that commitment to that longer term pays dividends in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I fully recognize that we're in the South and we've got an open season to grow cover crops. So that's part of it too. But it's, there is a lot going on there, and we're trying to figure it out.
Does that open season, though, does that sort of also, like, I get your point in that, sometimes the pushback against including a cover crop is it's a short season or it's too dry or it's those sorts of things. But shorter seasons can also sometimes, the soil it goes dormant and isn't necessarily burning through carbon as quickly either. So, I mean, you have a different set of challenges where you are than, say, where I am, where there's probably 3 weeks, 4 weeks difference between our seasons sometimes.
Right. Yeah. And we, I guess we're showing that it can happen, right? And then that the crop can respond in, a relatively short period of time. Whereas when I was in school, we were like, yeah, you can't change it. All you can do is hope not to lose it. I think we're seeing some evidence, not only here in Ontario, but elsewhere in the Midwest and throughout the world, that maybe, it's not hopeless. It can be done. And you brought up a good point, Lyndsey. We don't know if it's minimizing loss or if it's maximizing gain or if it's both. And maybe in terms of soil organic matter or soil organic carbon, and maybe it doesn't matter because however it's there, and the crop is benefiting.
So now it is World Soil Day. This is your life's work. This is the research that you do, the understanding that you try and do. How has the shift been? This is a 15-year, just this particular trial is your long term. But how significant has the shift been to this focus to soil health and soil management, let's say in the last 5 to 10 years? What has been your observation of that?
Right. So, so we first published maybe in 14, and that in 2014. So that's almost 10 years ago, and that was one of the first in Canada. And at the time, my colleagues throughout Canada, they were like, "Oh, I'm surprised you call it soil health." Like it was like, "Oh, shouldn't it be quality?" And there was a lot, like some pushback into this soil health term, and fair enough, right? I guess I don't really. Doesn't matter what you call it, right? To me, it's about what's happening in the soil and how is your crop responding. And any way we can raise awareness of, soil care, I think that's great. So it really has changed. And I really need to credit Anne Verhollen and Adam Hayes, who took on that research and let me play in that sphere because they invited me along. So it really has changed in a relatively short amount of time. And to me, it's more about let's get people talking about soil. You could call it what you want. Just protect your soil.
Well, I, for one, am excited to have you come out this way to Eastern Ontario because also, as an observation, in the last, I'd say, 4 years, now it's anecdotal, but I'd love to tally it up, but I would say observationally a lot more cover going in the fall. And so, and that is, I think that's significant. So, it's clearly a trend that is going forward, and not to say it's not without its challenges. And as you pointed out, there's lots of things we don't understand yet, but we're working to do so. And so, so thank you so much, Laura, for joining me. And I look forward to seeing you. I think, is that in February that you're here? I'll have to make
it. Mid-February.
Mid-February.
No, mid-January.
Oh, is it January? Oh, right. It used to be in February. Sorry. It used to be February, but they moved it to January.
That's right.
That's right.
Very close to my birthday.
Oh,
okay. I will be accepting birthday congratulations and beer.
And there you go. And maybe some cake. All right. Okay, Laura, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Well, thank you, Lyndsey. It's always a pleasure to speak soil with you.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we will hop to Bernard Tobin's discussion with Andrew Lawless out of PEI, talking cover crops and potato production, right after this.
Through a growing storm of kochia, cleavers, chickweed, and more, there's a clear path. Introducing Oxbow, a versatile cereal broadleaf herbicide that gets the job done. Powered by Duplisan technology, Oxbow is your workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds. With flexibility in timing, rates, and recropping options, your path is clear. Find your way on the path of least resistance at newfarm.ca/Oxbow.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday, December 5th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. It is Tuesdays with Lyndsey. It is World Soil Day. Basically, everything's coming up, Lyndsey. I got to tell you. All right, this segment is brought to you by Blackhawk EVO from New Farm. Blackhawk EVO is the next evolution in pre-seed burn-down herbicides powered by Duplisan. Blackhawk EVO delivers fast, flexible, and complete control of early germinating and winter annual broadleaf weeds. All right, get yours today. Chat with New Farm. Okay, now we are going to go all the way over to the East Coast to talk potatoes. Because, of course, if you go to PEI, you simply can't just go there and not talk potatoes. All right, let's hear from Bernard Tobin and Andrew Lawless. This is a Profitable Practices episode on cover crop incorporation in potato production.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin. Welcome to Profitable Practices. Today, I'm in Prince Edward Island, where potato farmers have increased their use of cover crops dramatically over the last 5 years. On this episode, I'm joined by Andrew Lawless, who farms here in Kincourt, Prince Edward Island. He tells us how cover crops are making his farm more profitable and more sustainable. Andrew, tell us about your farm operation. Give us a snapshot.
Hilltop Produce has been operating since 2005. We grow approximately 1,000 acres of potatoes on a 3-year rotation, along with small grains and cover crops, along with my wife, Heidi, and 4 children, Vance, Max, Maeve, and Drew.
Andrew, how does the weather and environment here on the island impact your ability to farm?
Climate change is a huge part of farming today on Prince Edward Island. We're seeing more extremes. Each year goes by. You never know whether it's going to be minus 20 on November 15th or plus 20. Some extremes there, and it's increasingly important to have our soil covered. It's part of soil health, erosion control, and overall profitability for the crop. Sustainability is important as well. Our major processors are wanting to know what's our sustainability, what's our long-term plan, and cover crops are a major part of that as well.
What are some of the challenges you face growing potatoes here on the island?
So some of the challenges can be the extremes in the weather. Weather may predict 5 mils of rain, and we get 50 mils of rain. You just never know what's going to come at you tomorrow.
Andrew, tell us about your cover crop program. Give us the nuts and bolts.
So there's been a lot of research done on cover crops. We basically have been part of that research for the past maybe 10 years or so. So that's allowed us to been able to decide which cover crops are going to work. As far as timing, I know Ryan Barrett with the Potato Board has developed numerous tables to work with to allow us to decide what cover crops to plant, on what dates behind which crops to get the best value for your bucket of your cover crops. Here at Hilltop Produce, I guess you never know what tomorrow is going to bring. You try to put your best plan together is what you're going to do in the spring, and due to the extreme weather events, that plan can change very fast. For the most part, we plant some sorghum Sudan. We were going to detour from that path, but we stayed with it because of the high cost of inputs this spring. We feel the value is there. It helps to add to the soil health. We've also used some mustard. Wireworms are more and more of a part of what we have here on PEI, and mustard neutralizes that a bit. And also in the fall here, we've been doing some tillage radish as well, and we like to put in with our plow, as you can see here, and it seems to hold the soil together, eliminates the erosion, and it kind of helps to work the soil for the coming year of potatoes as well. Works up very nice, the tilth of the soil. It works well. As well, whenever we're harvesting potatoes, that's when I find a lot of the erosion can occur after the potatoes. It's a very intense crop on the soil, so we like to do some winter wheat and hopefully get it through for a cash crop the next year. As well, we like to spread some barley as well after we harvest the potatoes. Our goal would be to have 100% of our farm in cover crops. Unfortunately, because of the late harvest dates, that always doesn't work, and every fall is different.
Andrew, how do you measure success, from a profitability perspective, from a sustainability perspective?
I guess the main success of cover crops for me, as I mentioned before, is to see the fields green. Be able to drive by 90% of our fields in November. They're all prepared for the winter. They're all green. We know there's not going to be a lot of erosion. That's a big win for me. To be able to consistently do cover crops year in, year out, and know it's adding to my bottom line is huge. It's not cheap to do cover crops. You can spend anywhere between $20 and $100 an acre, possibly even more on cover crops. Yeah, it's not cheap to do. Overall, growing potatoes is not a cheap crop. So if you can reduce your fertilizer inputs 5-10%, and overall the cover crops can add to your bottom line in yield to 10%, maybe even more year after year. The 8% was measured on one year. It wasn't measured on multiple years. So we keep going with this. You don't know where we're going to end up with it, and it's good.
What do you tell farmers about growing cover crops when they ask you about your experience?
For me, it's a no-brainer if I'm going to do cover crops or not. I guess my biggest question when I go to do cover crops is what cover crop am I going to plant? And I don't think it ever stays the same. I said it's constantly evolving. I may do radish this year. I may switch to buckwheat next year. There's constant change. That's farming as a whole.
The one thing for sure, change is constant. Absolutely. All right. Thank you to Andrew and to Bern for sharing that story out of PEI. That is, of course, from our Profitable Practices series. You can check that out on our YouTube channel or head on over to RealAgriculture.com. All right. We're going to take a quick break, and then I will be back with my discussion on soil phosphorus with Dr. Barbara Cade-Menun out of Swift Current.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground. We are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
Joining me now for today's product spotlight is Chris Turco. He's the CEO of FP Genetics. What sets your company apart from other Western Canada seed companies?
I think what sets us apart really is our people. We're a privately held company that is owned by over 170 farmers in Western Canada. It happens to be farmers that have a shared passion for new varieties, a shared passion for evaluating varieties on their farm, choosing the best genetics for their farm, and they happen to love producing seed and offering those varieties to their neighbors in their community. And then our staff, most of our staff is kind of mid-career, and they've been involved in seed from day one, right from our R&D group where we are evaluating varieties on a regional level for farmers, right through to our sales team, like I said, where half of them are still on the farm.
All right. There's a lot of exciting stuff out there and some big decisions to make for 2024. So always nice to have good options, and always great to have you on the show, Chris.
Thank you very much, Lyndsey.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by the Crossroads Crop Conference. Join Western Canadian farmers, industry leaders, and experts at Crossroads Crop Conference from January 29th to 31st at Calgary as we examine big picture innovation in agriculture. For tickets and details, visit crossroadscropconference.ca. All right, joining me now is Dr. Barbara Cade-Menun. She's a research scientist at Swift Current. She's looking at not just phosphorus availability, but the role of soil acidification in diseases, root rots, as well as potentially nutrient availability in general. Barbara, what do we need to know about soil acidification?
Well, what we're seeing in soils, just with in terms of the acidification issue, is we have some long-term plots here at Swift Current, and what we're starting to see from long-term ammonium-based fertilizer application is a pretty significant pH shift. This is something that has been occurring worldwide. It's very well known, and it's got to do with ammonia-based fertilizers. So the main ones would be ammonium nitrate, urea, and monoammonium phosphate. But it's the amount of, if you're adding high amounts of those fertilizers, which of course we've now bred some crops to take very high amounts of those fertilizers, or it's long term. But we lose a half a pH unit for every 1,000 kilograms per hectare of ammonia that we're adding. And so in some cases on our long-term plots that were established in 1967, the pH has dropped to 5 from 7. Yeah. And what happens is we're starting to see an increase in exchangeable aluminum. And exchangeable aluminum is a bad thing because it causes disease, particularly in crops like wheat. We're also seeing connected to that shifts in the soil microbial population, and that can cause incidences of disease organisms. I don't study clubroot, but I know that there's some suggestion that it's related to pH. Mm-hmm. We know I'm working with a root rot specialist, post-root rot specialist, they're looking at liming to try to alleviate root rot, and we've seen a pH connection as well to that. The other thing it does from a phosphorus perspective is it affects how available phosphorus is, because phosphorus in a neutral pH, so phosphorus is most available at pH 6.5. And so most soils on the prairies, phosphorus is fairly available unless you have really, really high pH soils like some areas in Manitoba. But as the pH drops, instead of calcium being the main thing that's controlling it, we get iron and aluminum, and they will bind phosphorus much more tightly. Mm-hmm. And that has the potential to change phosphorus fertilizer use efficiency.
You may have blown my mind a little bit because I hear the term of soil acidification coming up much more often than perhaps even 5 years ago, really. And, so I'm now based in Ontario, and liming is a pretty common practice because the soils are, generally speaking, lower pH. So it's a pretty common practice. Yeah. But on the prairies, it is quite rare. Like, how rare is the discussion of even liming at all?
Saskatchewan is the only province that does not have any mandated lime requirements or any practices for how to do it. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I was given some funding for this year from SaskPels and the ADF is to look at liming and looking at how to apply it and what to do. Mm-hmm. The main concern, of course, is just our fields are large compared to, say, smaller fields in Saskatchewan or in Ontario, although that's not to say they don't also have larger farms. But what we're also finding is that the issue is at the surface. It's where you're putting the fertilizer, and it's made worse under zero-till. So if you're applying your fertilizer in the top 10 centimeters, so, top 2 to 3 inches, under zero-till, it sits there. And so what you'll have is this really intensive acidification that disappears as you drop below about 20 centimeters or 6 inches or so in the soil. And so a lot of producers sample. If you're going to send your soils out for analysis, you probably sample maybe 0 to 6 inches or 0 to 12 inches. They tend not to focus too much on the surface. The problem is then you're going to completely miss the acidification. But that is where you're putting not just the fertilizer, but also the seed. And that's why diseases become an issue and fertilizer becomes, it's making it more acidic. It's making your phosphorus fertilizer sit there because it's going to bind it really tightly, so it's not going to get to the roots. And it's a big issue. It came. I just returned from a conference, a phosphorus conference, and the Australians have known about this for a long time. It's been known about this in China. Montana and a lot of the U.S. states have been talking about this for about 10 years. And we seem to, again, the assumption has always been that our soils are well buffered. There's lots of cations. Alberta's paid some attention to it, but it's often more related to acid deposition from industry. But the fact that we're doing it to our soils with the fertilizers we're applying, and we should have been expecting this. In fact, one of the scientists here, he's long gone now, but Con Campbell was a scientist here in Swift Current, and he said in 1994 that it was potentially, or 1984, he said in 1984 acidification was a potential problem, but it was okay as long as we never added more than 40 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen. Well, nobody adds only 40 kilograms.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So now, I guess the next point to this, and we know that phosphorus binds in the soil, so it's not it doesn't move necessarily with water. But does the drought and dryness of certain areas exacerbate this problem? Not have an impact? What Swift Current is a typically dry area, and it's right. But we also have we also have other areas of Saskatchewan that have experienced extreme drought. Does that help or hinder this whole process? Because nitrogen fertilizer is the problem, and it's usually fairly mobile in soils, drought will make it worse because, again, it's not leaching it through the soil profile. Some of the potential alleviation issues are, for example, if we go below, a foot or two. So a lot of Saskatchewan prairie soils have calcareous. The pH goes way up as you go lower down. So potentially just some really good deep tillage is going to solve the problem. I don't know. That's one of the things we're testing. But applying lime at the scale of fields is just not cheap. We had a hard time even finding lime in Saskatchewan. We didn't want large supplies of it, and so I think we bought it from one of the hardware stores, but they brought it in from Prince Albert because up there, close to the boreal forest, the soils are more acidic. That's known. The other thing to consider is potentially, we know monoammonium phosphate is an acidifying fertilizer, and yet that's the most common fertilizer on the prairies, whereas in eastern Canada, they've shifted to triple superphosphate, which contains calcium. But you can't buy that. Which strangely, it's really expensive here on the prairies, and yet it's so common elsewhere in Canada. I can't see why it couldn't be shifted to that. So these are some of the things we're trying to study right now. And just, what is the minimum amount? How long does it last? Can you apply it on the surface of lime on the surface of the soil and without tilling it in? Because, again, we're mostly focused on shifting this pH change at the surface. And for zero-till, because of all the benefits of zero-till, we would really rather not destroy all of the long-term impacts. But on the other hand, we can't continue the way we're going if we're not expecting to see a lot of other problems related to acidification. Right. And as you said, and this is, of course, one of those major issues is yes, nutrient availability, absolutely, but seed being put into potentially a more acidic zone, but the root rot and the clubroot, Aphanomyces, that whole question, which is why I'm guessing that SAS Pulse is supportive of your work, is what impact, right, on these tiny little seeds, on those roots, on the diseases that are present, what impact that may have as well is definitely a confounding factor. So put that all together, and I feel like you have a lot of work to do.
Yes, I think I'm going to keep myself busy for a while.
I think you are. Okay. This is fascinating. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate it. And we'll be watching for some outcomes of your work coming up.
Good. Thank you very much. And happy Soils Day. World Soils Day.
All right. With that, we're going to hop to a break, and I will be back with a clip from last night's episode of The Agronomists talking tile drainage right after this.
Now we'll be joined by Heather Watson, Executive Director with Farm Management Canada. Give us an update. What are some of the things that Farm Management Canada is up to? What are some of the things you're doing right now to move the needle?
Yeah, so we're doing a combination of, I would say, research and education and connection in the industry. So on the research side, we've just launched the results of our Farm Women study, which is super exciting, some really interesting insights that we'll discuss. And on the education and training, of course, you mentioned this conference. We have workshops in financial literacy. We have workshops in bridging the gap with farm transition, as well as some interesting kind of risk management activities. How do we look at what's happening in the changing business environment? How do we take a proactive approach? And what are all the connections we can make to the various aspects of business management? So it's a bit of a step-by-step, elephant one bite at a time approach.
Heather, keep up the great work at Farm Management Canada, and thank you so much.
I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by MMP. Seeking professional advice for your farm and business, MMP's team of agriculture specialists cover it all, from business planning and tax guidance to financial projections, farm succession, and risk management. Visit mmp.ca to connect with the experts today. For this last segment of the day, I cannot believe we're already done. This has been so much fun. I'm going to now throw to Matt Williams and Jesse Tait. They are drainage contractors here in Ontario. They joined me last night on The Agronomists. Absolutely great episode. Super, super knowledgeable gents. And I'm going to share here now a clip from last night's show. But if you want to hear the whole thing, head on over to our YouTube channel or realagriculture.com/agronomists. Check out the whole thing. Well worth it. Here we go. So let's start with, there are a few myths with tile drainage. There's a few things that maybe get talked about or people don't entirely always understand, those sorts of things. Matt, I'll start with you with first really laying it down. What is tile drainage? And then I'll ask, of course, what it is not. But what are we talking about when we're talking about tile drainage?
The easiest way I like to describe tile drainage is the process of drain. A lot of people don't realize that tile drains don't actually drain from the top, they drain from the bottom. So it's actually the water table coming up into the tile, the clean water that's being removed so that surface water and rain events have somewhere to go. And in order for it to get to the water table, it has to be filtered through the soil.
So Matt, I am one of those people. I had no idea. I honestly was like, it's like a trickle down. It trickles down and then out it goes. So, Jesse, is that a misconception that you tackle quite a bit, or how do you explain these things? And is it important to explain these things?
Yes, it's very important. Most people think that when we're out there trying to remove some of this water, A, we're going to drain their well, or B, all this water has to instantly get into that tile. And I'm like, we're really making a sponge. We're making a 2 to 3 foot sponge on the surface. Let's keep the water from coming up so high so you can get on the ground when you need to get on the ground. And then when you do have these rain events, it has somewhere to go. So you have some percolation. It gets back down into that nice sponge that you've created.
So in that sponge, so as I think about it, so tile is usually 2 to 3 feet down. Matt, what is sort of the standard depending on soil type?
Yep, that's correct. Obviously, the heavier soils, you tend to want to keep it a little bit shallower within the limits, but when you get those lighter soils, then you tend to go a little deeper so it can draw farther. But that's all determined from the test holes and knowing your area for sure.
Okay, and so we create that 2 to 3 feet, as you said, that sponge that then isn't having the water table come up from below, so it gives enough percolation room down. All right. Now, when it comes to sort of that beginning process of deciding, okay, it's worth it, I'm going to tile, Matt, walk me through sort of the beginning of the planning process. Is it a complicated process? Is this something that you very much are walking farmers through from point A to point B and onward? Or what does that look like?
We start with a survey. We survey the land. Most of us contractors are using full GPS now, so we can come up with a full topographic map based on the GPS survey. Then we can come up with a real accurate design on our computers once the design is completed and all the rules are followed and the laws in the book that we're supposed to follow, which is called Publication 29. Then we can come up with our materials list and our quote and then provide that for the landowner so that they have a budget to work with. Or if they're pricing other contractors, then you have a better idea what to expect from each contractor. Then the next step, you can dig your test holes, determine the soil type so that you're using the right type of tile, and to confirm that you're using the right tile spacing, which we can get into in a bit as well. Mm-hmm. Once that's done, then you order your materials, and then the installation process can begin.
But what are some of the most common concerns or questions you have to field as a drainage contractor when it comes to, nutrient movement or or soil movement, what you're trying to avoid? Matt, I'll start with you.
So we always get asked about, the outlet pipe is a direct path or polluting the waterways and all this stuff because of obviously the information that's up there with phosphorus and nitrates and so on. But Sid Vanderveen always had a really good quote that I liked. It was, somebody in the city or anywhere and say, do the highways pollute the air? And they'll say, yeah. And you say, well, no, it doesn't. It's the cars that pollute the air, right? So it all comes back to management and how you treat these systems. And I don't know, that was always my favorite one when it came to that, I guess.
Jesse, how do you tackle that question on water movement and nutrient movement?
Yeah, I guess it's a kind of a double-edged sword. We need the stuff there. It's when we apply it, how much you apply, just going back to your R's again there. But I've also said without drainage, if you had this stuff on the ground, just like any good farmer would, and you have these rain events, this stuff's still going to leach out, get around, it's going to find its way. So I'm not going to lie to you and say that, the stuff doesn't come out of the tile outlet. But if you're going to put it on there, it's going to go somewhere. So it's all about how much you put it on, when you put it on. Let's, do our best farm practices so we'll mitigate what's going to come through the soil, right? And through the outlet at the end of the day.
So Peter Johnson weighed in earlier that surface water is typically 10 times higher in nutrient content. So by trying to avoid surface water movement, by encouraging that percolation through the soil profile, that goes a long way in decreasing the total amount of nutrients that are at risk to move off that field. So I think it's really important to recognize exactly that. It's not no risk, but it's a risk we can manage, and that tile drainage doesn't make it worse. And in fact, for a lot of things, it makes it a lot better, which is pretty interesting how that works. So let's talk, and Jason's got some good comments I want to touch on in a bit. But we did mention roots. Jesse, I'll start with you. Let's say I just had a field tiled this year, and so then I put in winter canola. Is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? Which roots are the worst roots?
On a freshly installed system, the worst possible crop you could do would be winter canola. It can devastate a system in one season. So just got to talk to your contractor. We need to know what's going to happen right after because we don't want to have to go kind of clean that stuff up. But alfalfa roots can be an issue. Tree roots, especially if they're up against a neighbor's property or whatever, so you can't actually do anything about their trees. Yeah. That being said, we do have certain tricks of the trade that we try to use. We keep our mains away from that stuff so you can try to stay away from all that water-loving trees, willows, and all that kind of stuff. But, yeah, you're going to get roots in tile. It's a beautiful spot. You've had, that's where the roots are supposed to be going down to that tiled area, so they always have water. That's why drainage does such a good job in a drought situation. So we've already gotten rid of that water at the spring of the year. So the roots have went down. They're down near the tile. If we get a drought event, then all of a sudden the roots down, 16, 18 inches deep, they got lots of moisture. So they're going to make it through the hard time. They're not going to strain quite so bad. So we're going to put in a drainage system. You're going to get roots down there. Most of the time, they're just little wee hairs. They can get away. I believe, Matt, you had a bunch of work done there, and you started putting just external couplers on and stuff like that. And that's helped from catching all those little hair roots in tiles. So they create balls or whatever inside. And then, you have to dig them up and find them. People have tried back flushing. I've seen that work before as well. So it is one of those risks you can take. But for the most part, if you're consistently just cash cropping with, wheat, beans, canola, whatever, you're not going to have that issue with your drainage system.
Matt, do you have a favorite first crop after a field is tiled that you recommend?
The honest answer is any crop. The biggest thing for us is timing. Obviously, we wish we could do all of the work in a year, in that nice 2 months after wheat. But reality is we can't just work for 2 months of the year, and it's a matter of just trying to get everybody happy as quick as possible. A lot of guys like to do corn because obviously it's a little higher for the combine head. So if you do get a bit of settlement over the winter and the spring when you plant your corn, or even if you do it before corn in the spring, when you get a little bit of settlement, you're not fighting with it like you can be with beans where you have to get the head down nice and low. Mm-hmm. But other than that, just to Jesse's point about the canola roots, to keep in mind, the reason for that is because the soil is loose where we plow through the ground and install the tile. So it's just easier for those roots to go down deeper. And that's why in the first year, it's the most vulnerable for that sort of thing. And also going back to what you said at the start of the podcast about working the runs down right away. If you're in rocky soil, especially, you really want to let it settle naturally, because if the ground can settle around the rock as opposed to you driving on it with a big tire, it's going to shove it into the tile. Whereas if the ground can settle naturally, you're 90% or higher not going to have a problem.
All right, I'm going to leave it there for today because we're running out of time here, but also there is just so much more to this conversation. So thank you, though, to Matt Williams and to Jesse Tait for sharing of their knowledge and their experience. One really cool thing that I found, both of them are multi-generational drainage contracting companies. So Jesse's family has been at this for 3 or 4 generations. Matt is second generation. His parents actually started that company in 1984. Not exactly a great time to start a business, if anyone remembers 1984. I don't. I was too young, but I'm told it was a tough time. Anyway, so I found that really interesting, and great guys. Thanks so much for joining us or joining me on the show. And with that, we're going to wrap today up. So thank you to all of my guests, to our soil scientists, to Bernard Tobin for helping me out as well. Soil is just one of those things I find so fascinating. And of course, each of us really, in one way or another, owes soil for not just our livelihoods, but realistically everything we put in our mouths. So love your soil. Take good care of it. As the Axtons say, be loyal to the soil, and let's see what practices you can do in 2024 to feed that soil. Maybe choose something new and let us know what you did choose. If you would like to send some feedback on today's show, 1-855-776-6147. That's our feedback line. Or you can give me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. Of course, your regular host, Sean Haney, also accepts email, shaney@realagriculture.com. He is actually in Regina, Saskatchewan. He's attending the APAS meeting, and he'll be bringing the show from that meeting tomorrow, right here on Rural Radio at 4:30 Eastern. So check that out. And I, of course, will be back on Friday for the issues panel, and Thursday, as always, is our Farmer Rapid Fire. So we got a great lineup this week. Thank you again for joining me, of course. If you'd like to follow us on social media, much of what you heard today, you can also find at realagriculture.com, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and get all the visuals, get all the really cool videos that we do, see what's happening in the field. We sure would love it if you would smash that subscribe button. Alrighty, with that, I'll wrap it up. We'll talk to you again on Friday. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by the BC Centre for Agritech Innovation at Simon Fraser University, your go-to for advancing agritech. Ready to elevate your farm business? Achieve the productivity and profitability you're looking for with Agritech Development Program. Google SFU Agritech Innovation to learn more.